All right then, ladies and gentlemen, as I'm sure you've all heard by now, David Lammy, our Deputy Prime Minister and Chief Justice, has a remarkable idea for how to basically handle the sheer backlog of criminal trial cases that we've got going on in the United Kingdom. And that is basically to, as it says there in the BBC headline, basically just scrap jury trials for everything except the most serious cases. Now, obviously, I would actually just like to start by reading this particular section of a speech from Lord Devlin back in 1956, where he went on to say that, "For of all the institutions that have been created by English law, there is none other that has a better claim to be called, in the words of the Hamlin Trust, the privilege of the common people of the United Kingdom. It is one which no other European people enjoys, and it is one which, for its healthy working, requires the recognition by the common people of the responsibilities and obligations attached to it." So we can see from back in the 50s, right, the idea that we had jury trials in England was not just, it was an extremely proud thing, and it was very much built into the consciousness of British exceptionalism, right, that actually we're not just like those on the continent. We actually have our own particular inheritance here with these jury trials. Now, obviously, jury trials are a thing on the continent in serious cases, but really that is what this proposal would do. It would take us away from our own inheritance and drag us more into line with how things are majoritively done on the continent.
And obviously, in the past, there were heavy restrictions on who could be in a jury.
Yes.
Dependent on property and other such things. And honestly, I think those were common sense measures that anywhere that there is jury trials should be brought back.
Well, I agree.
But it was also an understanding that the English character and general intellect was that of such that if you have achieved a certain position in life, that you were capable of rationally and objectively assessing the evidence put forward to you and coming to a reasonable conclusion. That's a great deal of faith to put in your own subjects, and it goes to it, and it really does just play on the sort of rationalistic character of the Anglo.
And what's more as well, exactly to agree with your point, it also speaks to the high trust society that we used to have. It was a component, a characteristic of the high trust society, as you say, that we trusted the intellect, reason, and sense of justice of our own peers and our own citizens to basically come to a prudent decision.
And similarly, it did help to present a feeling within the populace that justice was not simply arbitrary, that this was, to a certain extent, a democratic process.
Right, absolutely. And it says the Ministry of Justice presentation, produced early this month, says that the Crown Courts are facing record backlogs with more than 78,000 cases waiting to be completed. And obviously they anticipate this to rising over 100,000 within a few years.
If there weren't just record numbers of foreign criminals in our country, how much lower do you reckon that backlog would be? Do you reckon we would even have a backlog?
Well, I think it would certainly help things, almost certainly. But this is, so the retired Court of Appeal judge, Sir Brian Leveson, of the Leveson Inquiry, recommended that the government ends jury trials for many serious offences, saying that they can be dealt with by a judge alone or sitting with two magistrates. So basically doing things as they are in the magistrates' court, where things are just overseen by a judge and some legal advisors and magistrates, but not having the actual jury. Now, obviously, most cases are done by the magistrates' courts, and so actually, as it happens, though we're obviously, we absolutely should defend the jury trial, most legal cases in Britain are not disputed this way, because the vast majority of them, I say, happen in the magistrates' courts and not the Crown Courts, where the jury trial is actually employed. However, the Leveson goes on to say that basically substantial structural change is essential, and our criminal justice system is at a crisis point. And he also went on to, sorry, it was also added later that in a document that Lamy has a hold of, that the reforms will improve timelines in the Crown Court through extra hearing time and not compromise our right to a fair trial. There is no right to a jury trial. No right to a jury trial. So just because we've had jury trials in England going back to the time of Anglo-Saxons, all of a sudden, as Wolf points out here, a Guyanese immigrant is just going to abolish them for the sakes of saving the logistics and workload of a failed and corrupt system.
What a ridiculous image.
I'll second that. Yeah.
There isn't that much to say. I mean, he was on the
What
question
do people have to say?
game, and he was asked who came after Henry VIII, and he said Henry VII.
We literally referred back to this point yesterday. Yes.
Well, I mean, he can't remember which king came after the other. He can't remember what he was saying 5 years ago, because people, of course, very easy to do this with any politician, have immediately found contradictory statements from only a few years ago. This one from the 20th of June 2020 of him saying, jury trials are a fundamental part of our democratic settlement. Criminal trials without juries are a bad idea.
And
well, you've jumped the gun a bit, because I was coming to that.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's quite all right. That's quite all right. I wasn't banking on you scrolling down. Sorry.
Nobody ever
I
does.
wanted to say, let us remember what happened with the jury trial of Ricky Jones.
Coming to that too.
Okay.
Yep, coming to that too. So let's just talk about, because Maven just posted here as well, that really evidence of a type of jury, obviously not the one that we have today, but just some sort of trial amongst peers, goes back all the way to Ethelred the Unready, one of the worst Anglo-Saxon kings, and yet still a more competent administrator than David Lammy, which is, of course...
They all would be.
They all...
Just name some of the ones that died before they ever really got to the crown. Still better than Lammy.
Yeah, Arthur, dead at 15. Henry's elder brother, better than Lammy.
Yeah.
Imagine having the nickname The Unready and still being better than David Lammy.
Well, I mean, he is a young ready to a T. Young worthy as well. But the point is that this is a grand heritage of our people. What's more as well, of course, as we go to clause 39 of the Magna Carta, where it talks about lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. And famously as well, there are many trials throughout English history where you can see a sharp difference between what the verdict would have been by mere appointed judge versus what the verdict of the jury came to.
I do think that this is the outgrowth of the war on civil society that
it is.
Modern leftism wages, because the idea is civil society is irreparably racist and bad and needs to be changed by the state. So we can't have jury trials except when it's our own guys on trial. But we just need our own guys into the justice system from the state, and we're going to force and change, socially engineer civil society.
Absolutely.
That's hatred towards society.
So to get on to what you were just looking at, Harry, as well, to David Lammy's case of amnesia from 5 years ago, when he talks about basically the fact that jury trials are a fundamental part of our democratic settlement, I actually just wanted to talk about that just a little bit, which is that the framing, of course, is entirely incorrect. Right. It's not a fundamental part of our democratic settlement. It's a fundamental part of our British settlement. And actually, the jury trial, from the time of the Anglo-Saxons, after Magna Carta, back when we had authoritarian kings like Henry VIII, right? No, it's not a staple of a democratic society. It speaks to the wisdom of the English people that we were able to create a justice system which basically gave everyone a fair hearing at the trial amongst his peers, irrespective of the type of constitutional settlement that they existed under, whether it was absolute monarchy or modern democracy, right? That is far more permanent than the very narrow window that David Lammy is looking at it through when he speaks about mere democracy, as if it's just a staple of mere democracy. Well, as we've already spoken about, it's not a staple of every single Western democracy. at all. And but then we get to the sort of conundrum of, basically, as Leo points out here, that it's an appalling idea because without a jury of peers, anyone on trial will be at the mercy of activist judges who don't even hide their bias against anyone deemed far right. If there's a backlog of trials and end pointless prosecutions for speech and crimes. Look, on principle, I do agree with what Leo is saying. However, the fact of the matter is that, of course, as we know, it's not exactly like the jury verdicts have been particularly infallible either recently.
Every institution can backfire.
Yes.
That's not a reason on its own to destroy it.
Well, the question is, the whole point of the jury is supposed to be a jury of your peers. In certain parts of this country, the people who are going to be judging you are not your peer. They are people who self-consciously see themselves as your friend or your enemy. I hate to put it in such blatant tribal terms, but as you're going to point out, there are some trials which have gone forward with a jury where they have shown blatant bias towards the defendant. And this is the kind of thing that we can see going all the way back to the OJ trial in America, where it seemed that they purposefully stacked the trial full of black people because they knew that it would give some kind of advantage to OJ, which it did, because after he got off, 20 years down the line, people on that jury said, yeah, we did it as payback for Rodney King. Then you get a situation like Derek Chauvin, where a BLM activist actually got on his trial and helped to sway the verdict. Not that I thought, sadly, that the Derek Chauvin trial was ever in doubt that they were going to find him guilty, no matter what the actual evidence was.
No, of course not. And there's a free speech union point out here. Juries have been the last line of defence against the authoritarian cancel mob. When our members have found themselves charged with criminal offences for speaking out, juries have reliably said no dice to overzealous prosecutors. This has infuriated the Crown Prosecution Service and the activists who make malicious complaints. One was Jamie Michael, a decorated Royal Marines veteran, who was charged with inciting racial hatred after a Labour staffer reported him to the police for a video he posted on Facebook. And Jamie spent 20 days in prison on remand, and the jury took just 17 minutes to clear him. And the local Labour Party were quite furious about this. So even now, in our contemporary times, we do see examples of the jury service, just for want of a better way to put it, just coming in clutch and just saving some obviously wronged, persecuted people who are basically just being grinded down by the orthodoxy of the state, the ideological orthodoxy of the state, which, as we know...
It's good to provide counter-examples to the sorts of phenomenon that I was presenting.
Yeah, definitely. It does still matter, but as Tom points out here, data shows that in Britain, non-white jurors display a marked preference for non-white defendants and the corresponding bias against white defendants, whereas white jurors exhibit only a modest pro-non-white bias by comparisons. And this really comes down to what we were saying about what you were saying about Ricky Jones, Stelios, because as this piece here is just dragging it from Connor's, where he said that basically wanted people to have their throats cut and just called for it live, and he was tried.
He was inciting violence.
He was,
yeah.
And did he impersonated him. And he did this mannerism.
Yeah, the gesture, all of it. It was as clear-cut as we could have possibly thought it would have been.
Yeah.
Sorry, a bad pun. Didn't even mean it. But the point of the matter is that, well, yes, but he was tried in a place that was minority British, and they probably agreed with him anyway. And so you can get off and be acquitted for demonstrable injustices. There's also this example as well, most recently, even this month, of ex-footballer Joey Barton, basically guilty of sending offensive messages to TV personalities. This also was a jury trial where they found him guilty on several counts for basically sending messages online that were deemed to have been intentionally harmful and to stir up hurt in the other person as well. And so we're having all of these injustices. So again, Leo is right that there are a phenomenal amount of activist judges, and even if those judges are indigenously British, they are coming from the same sort of institutions, and Rupert has been very good as well on all of this, just showing, particularly with the Bar Council, I didn't get it up, but, their sort of DEI programs and everything like that, they're still entirely susceptible. There's no real ideological dissimilarity between, like, the Bar and Whitehall. Right, they're all part of these.
Well, I mean, consider as well when we're talking about the problems with CPS judges, when the Epping situation went from the local council and the government brought it before the judges, and the judges decided that the safety of people within Epping was not as important as defending the rights of refugees who were putting the people of Epping in danger, even after the person that they were protesting against being in that hotel in the first place was convicted as a sex offender. This was, of course, before he was then accidentally released from prison.
Sure. Yeah, that entire...
Every stage of our justice system is corrupted and broken in ways that realistically would be quite easy to fix. When we're talking about the bias of these judges, that needs to go to an educational matter before they even get anywhere near those halls of power. They need to be not brainwashed to be leftists the way they are. And with the jury service, people would be uncomfortable with it, but it would simply need to be a case of re-implementing certain restrictions on who can be selected for a jury.
Isn't Lamy also responsible for the constant accidental release of prisoners?
At least two.
Yeah,
at least two higher profile cases.
Twice.
Yeah, there's the perfect CV to have someone change the entire institutional structure of your country.
Change our culture.
Yeah. Well, also just to say something else to your point, Harry, as well, that when you have cases like these, like the Joey Barton one, of course, in some ways, irrespective of the makeup of the jury, what is also obviously impinging on any sense of reason or justice is the fact that the jury and the judges are obviously working within the legal framework and the legislation, of course, passed by Parliament. And so they can only find Joey Barton guilty of such things if they are, of course, legal offences in the first place. If you take away that legislation to say that these sorts of things are a crime, such as obviously they got with Dankula and the 2003 Communications Act, strip that away, then you can't find people to be guilty of things that aren't crimes anymore.
If only there'd been some kind of, this is going to sound whimsical now, conservative supermajority that could have passed or repealed legislation at will.
Yeah.
If only.
We didn't have one of those, though, did we? And so we're really ending up with the point now, whereas Conley Druckper points out here, with the Lee Kuan Yew sort of version of society, where it says, in a multiracial society, trial by jury can result in communal prejudices influencing verdicts. I would rather put my future in the hands of a trained judge than in the hands of 12 men who can be swayed by prejudice or rhetoric. Jury trials may work in homogeneous societies, but not in a sharply multiracial one. You can't assume that each juror will set aside his race, language, and religion. The jury system is part of an English tradition that presumes a common culture. That assumption cannot hold in a society like ours. And so the reason that I bring up this quote is, one, because I agree with it. I think that Kuan Yew is basically just showing an understanding of human nature and our prejudices as people and what sways us, but also the fact that to some extent this is what Lamy is doing is absolutely a travesty, and he should not. It should be unthinkable to even suggest the idea, right? Well, hang on, we've had this system for just a millennia, but now we're just going to scrap it based on the backlog due to the incompetence of government that they exhibit in basically anything that they do these days. And so, as always, we lose out. We're the ones that have our traditions torn away from us, our legal precedents, our very heritage, and our own very parochial sense of justice taken away from us by foreigners who aren't inheritors of this tradition. And what's more as well, the even more insidious point of it is that whether it's juries or just magistrates or, whoever it may be, judges, we lose either way, it seems. It kind of feels like we just lose either way at this point because of the demographic trends that we've been pointing to and the ideological prejudices of the elites and people, the middle classes who make up the lot of judges and, of course, Whitehall and the Crown Prosecution Service, the people who work within those corridors. They're all predisposed to distrust and kind of hate us anyway and bring down the full force of the law, as Keir Starmer loved to remind us after Southport. And so we're in a bit of a lose-lose situation, I'm afraid, here, lads. I can only hope that one other thing just to say is that it seems that basically every single person was against this. Kemi Badenoch was against this. Nigel Farage was against this. Jeremy Corbyn was against this. The Bar Council were against getting rid of the jury trials. It seems that the only people...
So this is a purely Lammy-based decision, or at least Lammy and people around him who support him.
Based off of advice from Sir Brian Leveson, yes. And so it seems to be a common example of this grand democratic settlement that David Lammy loves to give lip service towards. But David, you had no mandate to do this. This wasn't in your manifesto. We certainly gave no public sort of insinuation that we wanted this to happen. And what's more as well, everyone kind of seems to disagree with you and think this is a bad idea. And if you cared so much about the democratic settlement, then maybe you would actually care about that. But you don't. This is just a way for you to sort of filter people through the courts as fast as possible because of the historic number of criminals that you and successive governments have allowed into this country who behave on average, we have the statistics, the per capita statistics, much worse than your average British person. And so we're in a position now where we're seeing everything eroded around us, and we can only hope that if Nigel Farage does a few good things when he becomes Prime Minister, that revoking this will be one of those things, because it actually sounds as well like this could be a change that is brought upon us very, very quickly. We could be seeing this as early as the start of next year. And so, once again, it's not the greatest news, and there's some added pain having it thrust on you by the greatest midwit in Britain.
I think midwit's being very generous.
Well, I have to cater my language to YouTube.
Do you mind if I just go on a quick divergence regarding the Lee Kuan Yew and the quote that you brought up there? Yeah. I'm a little bit torn currently on the kind of the way that right-wingers like to bring up Lee Kuan Yew so much. And I'll preface this by saying I greatly respect what Lee Kuan Yew was able to achieve with Singapore, given the situation that he found himself in with where Singapore is situated, the various different populations that were set there. But I do distinctly feel like the left and right, the technocratic left, that is, get two very different things from Lee Kuan Yew. For the right, we see all of this sort of stuff as a warning. We see him saying multiracial societies break down trusts, it turns into factionalism, and we say we don't want that. We want to maintain our traditions, we want to maintain our trust. For technocratic leftists and even technocratic centre-right types as well, they see Lee Kuan Yew as a roadmap to the kind of society that they want to build, which is essentially a corporate technocratic police state. As much as we can respect Singapore for what it is, we have to also acknowledge that that is what it is. Because of the circumstances Singapore found itself in, they have had to become an authoritarian police state to maintain order. And that was set up by Lee Kuan Yew. Of course, to make Singapore work, that's what he had to do. But they want to turn us, at the same time as kind of turning everything into a giant open-air favela, because they don't have the same kind of willpower that Lee Kuan Yew does, nor the common sense that he does. At the same time as trying to turn everything into a favela, they also want to turn everything into a large corporate police state. based entirely around service economies, where increasingly our traditions and our high trust societies are taken away so that they can facilitate the corporate profit motive. And they see this sort of stuff and they go, brilliant. So it can work. So we can get it to work if we just do all of the authoritarian stuff that he was forced to do.
Which obviously...
I worry that legacy is not actually going to be a positive one for the West.
I'm in full agreement with you. Full agreement.
Yeah.
No, and I agree as well. And obviously I'm not invoking the quote to show that I want England to become Singapore, or like this is a roadmap.
I don't think Lee Kuan Yew would have wanted us to become Singapore either. He was in a very specific place, with a very specific set of circumstances. Again, I just worry that there is two very different views that you can take of what he speaks about and his prescriptions for how he made Singapore work.
Oh, definitely. I share your concern on that. But this entire episode has just been another example of how, you know, the sort of old saying about how multiculturalism is so wonderful that it just requires an ever-encroaching loss of your freedoms and basically an authoritarian superstate to keep all of the minorities in line and to make sure that they all get along. And it's like, well, I didn't sign up for that. I actually just wanted to be an Englishman living in England, never really concerning myself with any of that. So it's, it's really dark stuff. But like I say, I don't think it can last forever. And a lot like the abortion stuff and other things, when they're just putting through stuff that just has no mandate whatsoever, or just lowering the voting age to 16, you know, it just goes to show that, you know, we can just keep all of these in our journals and just remember, well, you know, back when you had all that power, you didn't give a damn about the consent or what you were doing. You just sort of forced your vision on everyone else. So if we want to change the voting age, we'll change the voting age. We want to bring back the jury trials, we'll bring back the jury trials. We want to bring back the death penalty, we'll do that too, right? They've shown that they have no consideration for the consent of those out of power.
If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.